the more I reflect on what we do every day when we go into work, is this: design is the science of deliberate decision making. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the science of holding an opinion, because it's very definitely not. And it doesn't mean that it's the science of arbitrary decision making, because it's very definitely not. Design is exploring how we can make the best decisions we can in environments of shades of grey. Because we live in an ambiguous world, as Rebecca has said, and our job regularly is to make black and white decisions out of the shades of grey. Thank you, Damon. Thank you for the invitation to come and to speak to you all. It kind of feels like the speakers have been going in kind of chronological order. You know, we get the guy who's been playing with AI for 3 years, then we've got the lady who's been thinking about design and engineering for 15, and here I am coming in at the rear with 30 years. So we're just kind of building up the experience. And I was kind of thinking how I might frame what I'm going to share with you this evening. And in the end, I think the easiest or the best way that I thought I might frame what I wanted to share was just to think about what I've learned about the discipline of design over the last 30 years and how I kind of reflect on it. So they've kind of left the old guy with the most experience of this evening's speakers to the end. This is me. This is me looking pensive with coffee, trying to look serious in agency mode. But I've been involved in agency life, and I've been involved in digital all my life. Let me just tell you really briefly how I've landed here. So I graduated in 1994 and joined AIB Bank in Dublin. And I found myself, by coincidence, by fluke, working on the project team that built Ireland's first online personal banking project. And that got me completely hooked on this new thing called the internet. It wasn't even the Wild West, it was before the Wild West. But personal banking came along in Ireland in January 1997, and even though I was a much younger man back then, I realised that the world had the internet had changed the world. Certainly in the context of the bank, it had flattened the hierarchy between the bank and its customers. So until January 1997, the only customers in the bank who could see their balance or their ledger or transfer funds on a computer screen were the bank's very best customers, customers who were millions and millions of pounds in deposit through a little terminal called a Minitel terminal. All of a sudden now, if you had an internet connection and you were a customer of the bank, you could manage your funds via a computer screen. Little did we know back then that fast forward 30 years and that would be taken for granted and you would do it on a mobile phone. But back then there was something kind of exciting and new about this. And I sort of knew the internet bandwagon, the internet wagons were rolling west, and I think I probably wanted to be on those wagons. So when I got a chance in 1997 to join a small 4-person business called Tibus, based in Hollywood at the time, to move back home to Belfast from Dublin, I jumped at the chance. So I joined Tibus, a 4-person business on a 6-month contract. And I ended up staying 13 years. They let me out eventually for bad behaviour. But in the end, 4 people turned into 55 people. I led that business for 9 years. And in 2008, the business was sold to UTV. And I stayed there for about 18 months after we were sold into UTV. Realised that PLC life wasn't for me. So joined another small business called, at the time it was called Ion. It's now called Ionology, as a kind of an interim MD. And then in 2011, I set up a design practice called Fathom. And I owned and led it for 9.5 years. And sold it in May 2021 to a business called Lo and Behold, who then changed their logo, but they're still Lo and Behold. They then changed their name, but not their logo. And they're then Logic and Magic. And they've now changed both their name and their logo, and they're now called Ideas and Outcomes. So I stayed there for about 18 months after I sold the business, and what that means is that from 2023 onwards, I've been doing my own thing. So I've been doing some consultancy, and I sit on some boards, and I do some coaching and mentoring, and I've been really enjoying that. And if any of you feel that you might benefit from that, come and speak to me afterwards. But I suppose, as I say, I've been at it 30 years. I just want to let you know that the road is not to scale. So, I don't expect to expire in a couple of years. I might, but it's very hopefully the road will go on a little bit further. But I suppose I want to share with you what have I picked up or what have I learned over that period. I think one of the things that has struck me particularly in the latter stages of my kind of career or my journey, is that when I observe people who are great leaders, or I observe people who achieve great things, or I think about the great bosses that I may have encountered, or really good chairmen or chairwomen, and I think about what are their ingredients. Very often their ingredients aren't the fact that they know the latest thing or the newest trend or stuff you have to know for 2026. What they're really brilliant at is just reminding everybody in the team, everybody who they lead, about the fundamentals. So if you're kind of here tonight thinking, oh, what might Gareth say about what we need to know in 2026? Probably not a lot. But I do have some reflections about what is the job. If we're involved in design and we scratch away all the stuff that goes around that, we scratch away all the processes and the tools and the stuff that we do, what are we here to do? Like, what is the value that we want to bring the world? If we're designers or we're involved in product design, or even if we're in tech and we're involved in product development, what's the value we're trying to bring? Like, why are we here? What is it that we're wanting to do? And I suppose as I kind of reflect on those 30 years, I've sort of thought to myself, if I'd put myself in that sort of chairmanly position, or the old guy trying to remind us of our purpose, what's at the kernel of the value we bring? That's kind of what I've been thinking about that I might share with you this evening. So I've got 4 simple things that hopefully will be useful. They're not new, they're not trendy, but hopefully they'll be useful and they'll kind of give us a focal point. Here's the first one. The more I reflect on what we do every day when we go into work, is this: design is the science of deliberate decision making. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the science of holding an opinion, because it's very definitely not. And it doesn't mean that it's the science of arbitrary decision making, because it's very definitely not. Design is exploring how we can make the best decisions we can in environments of shades of grey. Because we live in an ambiguous world, as Rebecca has said, and our job regularly is to make black and white decisions out of the shades of grey. Now, as if that isn't challenging enough by itself, there are a number of kind of quiet forces, really strong influences that we're normally not even aware of, that detract us from making good decisions. And let me take you through a couple of them, if I may. So one of the first challenges that we face is bias and noise. So if we're trying to make a decision, what we want to do is we want to hit the target with the decision. We want the decision to be as accurate and impactful and powerful as we can make it. That when a project team gets in a room, generally that's what everyone wants to achieve. But there are forces. So one of the forces that we have to face is the force of bias. So what bias means is that a group of people get together, but because they are making false assumptions, because they haven't properly explored what the data says, because they think they know their customer better than they do, a project team is systematically inaccurate in the decisions that they make. And that's bias that we have. There's all sorts of biases we have to overcome. Personally, I think the one that is the hardest one to overcome is extrapolation. And by extrapolation bias, what I mean is, as we sit round tables making decisions about products and services we're designing for our users, we kind of assume that they're a bit like us. We extrapolate our own experience of the world, our own preferences, the things that we like, the mood that we have. We just extrapolate it onto the customer. We sort of assume they're like us. And projects that use extrapolation that way generally are doomed to fail. So we've got bias. But as well as that, we've also got noise. And noise refers to the randomness of life. It refers to the ambiguity of trying to understand humans. I think my favourite example of noise comes in football punditry and football commentary. So, when there's a football game on TV, the pundits are asked their opinion before the match comes on. They give their opinion about which team is playing well and all the rest. And then they have the match, and then there's a result from the match, and then they review how accurate their pre-match result comments were. But they never talk about luck and chance. So in an environment, something like the Premiership, you think about an international rugby match, you think of literally the bounce of the ball. It's not even a metaphor, it's actually the bounce of the ball. And the role of luck and chance never gets talked about. The noise of the universe gets called out as if a football game or a rugby match is this rational, controlled environment, when it's simply not. So when project teams are sitting together and they're trying to hit the target, They have difficulties around dealing with bias and have difficulties around dealing with noise. The other challenge that we face is that as humans, we get wedded to our opinions. So we have a decision that we need to make as we sort of consider how we're going to make it. Something in our brain, often arbitrary, rarely conscious, emerges and it becomes our opinion. It becomes the belief we have about the question that we're trying to answer, the problem that we're trying to solve. And the difficulty is that it's not often obvious how we've landed at that conclusion, but critically, we get wedded to that conclusion. Now, I thought I was going to be the first person this evening to mention Bertrand Russell, but as it turns out, he's already been mentioned. So I feel a little bit marginally less pretentious than I otherwise would have at giving you a Bertrand Russell quote. Now, it's a long one, so please bear with me. It's my only long quote of the session. If an opinion contrary to your own makes you angry, that is a sign that you're subconsciously aware of having no good reason for thinking as you do. If someone maintains that 2 and 2 are 5, or that Iceland is on the equator, you should feel pity rather than anger, unless you know so little of arithmetic and geography that his opinion shakes your own country conviction. The most savage controversies are those about matters as to which there is no good evidence. Persecution is used in theology, not in arithmetic, because in arithmetic there is knowledge, but in theology there is only opinion. So when you find yourself getting angry about a difference of opinion, be on your guard. You will probably find on examination that your belief requires more evidence. And this is the key, folks. You know, there's been a bit of discussion already about the tension between, user needs and value, or design and money, or about how technologists and designers can work together. And there's friction there. And very often the thing that could guide that to a better outcome is often missing. The insight or the ingredients in the conversation that are real. The data, the value, the qualitative understanding of your users, the things that will guide you through that conversation are often missing. So we've got bias, we've got noise, and we've got this idea that all of us very often get wedded to our own ideas. And the final challenge that we face when we're making good decisions is often we think we know where our decisions came from, but ultimately, actually, we don't. I'll just tell you a quick story, if I may. There's a really famous experiment where where commuters in London come out of the tube station and they walk down the street and they pass a busker. And the researcher observes how many of those commuters give money to the busker. So let's say 1 in 10 give some money to the busker. So that's the control in the experiment. But the second part of the experiment is that as the commuters come off the tube, there are 10 stooges who are ready in the tube station, that as they're about to come up the steps, these 10 stooges file up the steps onto the London street just ahead of the commuters. And the stooges are primed that each one of them puts money in the basket of the busker. And the experiment asks, does the first 10 people putting money in the basket of the busker influence the likelihood of everybody else putting money in the basket of the busker? So the answer is a very definite yes. 4 times more people put money in the busker's hat or whatever the busker has on the street if the first 10 people out do that. So far, it's an interesting social experiment. But where it gets hopefully relevant to what I'm sharing with you this evening is that there's a final part to the experiment where there is another researcher just down the street who stops the commuters and says, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I noticed that you give the busker some money. Why did you give the busker money? And people say things like, oh, I really liked the song that they were playing, or I felt sorry for them, or I have a relative, a cousin, a brother who does some busking, and I always like to support buskers. In other words, the commuters were completely unaware of the social context, the social pressures, the social cues that made their brain say, I'm going to act in that way. And again, it's the same in a business environment. You think of the cultural and the professional norms that go into a group of people coming up with a decision or concluding something. So you've got age deference up to a point. You've got seniority, deference up to a point. You've got the highest paid person in the room who probably gets the most airtime and therefore often gets their way. You've got extroverts getting their way more commonly than introverts. So you have all this social stuff going on as well, which means groups of people end up making decisions that are not in the best interests of the user, or sometimes even in the best interests of the business. So when we talk about our job is to make deliberate decisions, that sounds obvious. Yeah, of course we're going to make decisions. But this word deliberate, this understanding that we just live in an environment where bad decisions or suboptimal decisions or decisions that aren't as good as they could be, they're just around every corner. And the only way we overcome that is to recognize it, commit ourselves to better processes, and arm ourselves with data and insight. So that's the first old guy thing that I've learned. When you boil down what our job is, it's pursuing effective decisions. In order to do that, I think the embrace of wrongness is a superpower. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let me ask this question, folks. What does it feel like to be wrong? So what adjectives would you use to describe your feelings when you're wrong? Shout some out, please.
Shock.
Shock. Sorry?
Guilty.
Yes. Anything else?
Funny. Funny.
Fine. Did you say fine?
Funny.
Funny. Okay, funny.
Surprising.
Surprise. It happens so rarely, Lorcan, does it?
Not.
Sorry?
Discomfort.
Yeah, discomfort. Yeah. Maybe a couple of final ones, any?
Shame.
Yeah, shame. Yeah, absolutely. Shame, embarrassment. Absolutely. So I think all those things are real. But with just one nuance. I think the adjectives that you folks have used to answer the question, those describe what it feels like to realize you're wrong. But before the moment of realization, being wrong feels great. It's the realization that you're wrong that feels so good. Let me give you a quick example. I'm not going to do this, by the way, folks, so don't worry. I'm not going to ruin the evening. But let's say, let's take this group and let's think about a subject about which none of us really know the answer. So, does God exist? Right? So there'll be people in this room who believe very fervently that he or she does, and there'll be people in this room who very fervently believe that he or she or it doesn't. Now, mathematically, logically, rationally, and let's say it's split 50-50. 50% of you will be wrong, and 50% of you will be right. But 100% of you feel good about your decision right now. As you sit there now, you feel good about where you've landed on what I think is a pretty big question. So 100% of us feel good, even though 50% of us are wrong. So being wrong actually feels good.
Sorry, you're not sure that they're 50% wrong.
You are right. And you know, and the thing about it is, when you have a talk like this, which is all about how you should distrust your own opinion, everything I'm sharing here is opinion. So please feel free to just throw it all in the bin. And you know, over the years, I have amassed any number of stories about the difficulty of being wrong. I'm going to just share with you one of them, which is one of my favourites. Now, it's not every group I ask this, but I think, does anyone in the room know who this guy is? Yes? It is indeed James Randi, yes. Who's famous? He's famous for all sorts of things. Do you know the thing he's most famous for? Yes, he's a myth debunker. So this is one of my great heroes. So he's James Randi. He's a magician and he is a myth debunker. And this is what he says: magicians are the most honest people in the world. They tell you they're going to fool you, and then they do it. So Randy, he passed away, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. But up until just before his death, for 30 years, he had a $1 million fund. Now, Randy was a magician, but he was at pains to tell people that he was a conjurer, he was a trickster. Like, he wasn't blessed with supernatural powers, he just knew how to manipulate stuff. And Randy had no time for people who claimed to have supernatural powers. So a magician coming on stage and doing card tricks, no problem. But a faith healer pretending to heal people, he wasn't having it. A psychic pretending that they could speak with your dead relatives, he wasn't having it. Or Uri Geller's bending spoons, we're going to come to this, he wasn't having that either. So he debunked myths, and he had this £1 million fund. And the $1 million fund. And the $1 million fund was this. If you are a supernaturalist, and you're claiming not that you do magic tricks, but that you have these supernatural powers, if you can carry out a trick in a controlled environment, then he'll give you $1 million. So the $1 million fund was open for 30 years. How many times did he hand over the million? Never. Never handed over the million. Because the whole thing's just quackery. It's fakery. And Randy was wanting to expose that. Anyway, back to Uri Geller. So Uri Geller, I'm sure some of you might know, he was particularly big in the 70s and 80s. He was this Israeli conjurer, supernaturalist guy. And there's a couple of tricks that he had, but the one that he was most famous for was that he alleged he could bend spoons. Now, many of you of a certain age will remember him, and I can see lots of you of a younger age are going, yeah, I think my granny mentioned him once. But he did this thing where he would rub a spoon, and the spoon would bend in front of you, and often the end of the spoon would literally fall off the spoon. And he was getting big, but he was bothering Randy because he wasn't saying, yes, I'm a good magician. He was saying, I've been given this gift. I've got this gift. So Randy just wasn't happy. So I don't have time to show you all these videos, but if you're interested, please go onto YouTube when you go home and have a look at them, because they're kind of interesting. So this is this is Uri Geller doing his trick, not with a spoon but with a key, on TV. So everybody thought this was great, but a younger Randy wasn't having any of it. And in this video, I'm not going to show you it, but in this video, Randy just does this little tutorial where he shows you how Uri Geller does this. So that's that. So that's the video. So you've got Uri Geller claiming supernatural powers, and you've got James Randi going on TV saying this is how he does it. And Uri Geller's audience were no less attentive or no less enthralled by the fact that Randy was debunking what he was doing. Anyway, in the late 70s, Uri Geller was booked to go on the Johnny Carson show. So the Johnny Carson show at the time was the biggest late night show in the States. Uri Geller was the guest, but Johnny Carson was a friend of James Randi. So when James Randi heard that Uri Geller was going on the Johnny Carson show, James Randi said to Johnny Carson, ask him what tricks he's going to do, and I will tell you how to set up the studio so that they can't be done. So that whatever deity Uri Geller is calling on won't be available that night. We'll be looking after some other trick. So this is the start of the Johnny Carson show. Okay, so Johnny Carson welcomes Uri Geller. So Uri Geller comes on, he sits down, he starts the trick, and he goes, oh, I'm not feeling the force tonight. I'm not feeling the force. And it goes on, and like it's excruciating TV. Like it went out live in the States in the late 70s. And there's this excruciating 15, 20 minutes where Uri Geller is moving and shifting and changing and all the rest. It gets so bad that they have to have an intermission. Just that they have to get to a commercial break. So they get to a commercial break and they come back. And when they come back, I won't show you it all, but again, I'll show you very briefly. They come back, there's more to come. Eventually it shoots back. And what you can see here is a really stressed looking Uri Geller explaining, oh, your producer said this, your producer said that. So the thing is this, James Randi was sure, oh, that's still playing. James Randi was sure that would be the end of Uri Geller. But it wasn't. It was the start of Uri Geller. And here's what Uri Geller's followers said. They said to James Randi, James, you're just a second-rate trickster. You're just showing us through trickery what Uri Geller can do through his supernatural powers. So even though Randi had debunked the myth, had exposed the liar, still it was impossible for people who had bought into it to acknowledge their wrongness and reverse their way back out. The other great example of the difficulty of being wrong is in 1984 when DNA testing emerged and became reliable and became scientifically provable. What you found was you'd thousands and thousands of men in particular in jail for crimes that they did not commit and that were provable through DNA. And you just had a legal system squirming and ducking and diving, just finding it impossible to admit its wrongness. So we've got bias, we've got noise, we've got the social cues that mean that we have to keep our decisions deliberate, but we also have this weddedness, this belief that we're right. And actually, when you think about it, we're wrong all the time. And the ability to acknowledge our wrongness, or to be skeptical of our own opinion, or to treat our own views lightly, I think it's a superpower. I think to have the humility to acknowledge that in the madness and the complexity of the world within which we live, that we might be wrong, in fact, probably are wrong. There's something very freeing about just saying, do you know what? I'm just not going to trust my opinion just straight off the top. Let's poke this, let's prod it, let's test it. So for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. So with my chairman hat on, my 30 years chairman hat on, doing design, there's just something really important about project teams acknowledging, do you know what? We could be wrong. We're probably wrong. Let's try and work out how we can be less wrong. Number 3, behaviour eats opinion for breakfast. So obviously, if many folks in here are involved in design, huge amounts of design are based around research, based around knowing your customer. There's all sorts of ways that you can get to know your customer or know your user better. You can ask your customer for their opinion, or you can observe your customer's behaviour. And time again, what we find is that observing behaviour is significantly more predictive, significantly more powerful, has significantly better outcomes than trusting their opinion. I want you to imagine that you are an American TV producer. And you get an email one day, and the email says, we've got this really exciting comedy show. It's done really well in the UK, and we're thinking of bringing it to the States. And we understand it's a different culture in the States, they have a different view of humour. So we recognise that the comedy is going to have to be changed to make it suitable for an American audience. But we'd like you to consider taking this comedy and repurposing it so that it's ready for an American audience. Are you interested? So you say, yes, that sounds interesting. Yeah, let's have a look at this. And you take it to a focus group. And you run it through a focus group. And the way these focus groups work is that the groups are given a range of different types of program, and their attitudes to those programs are kind of explored and teased out. So you're the producer, you do the focus group, and the focus group doesn't go well. In fact, this program does so badly that it is ranked joint last with women's bowls. So you run the focus group. Gee, this is so boring that our audience would prefer, or at least equally like, to watch women's bowls than watch this comedy. Does anyone know which comedy I'm referring to? I'm referring, of course, to The Office. Exactly right. So user opinion says this is unwatchable. This is just as unwatchable as ladies' bowls. User behaviour says, and let me just look at my notes so I get my stats right. User behaviour says it's the most streamed TV show in America. 40% of Americans have watched it at least once. Loads and loads of awards. And the number that gets me is that in 2020 alone, Americans devoted 57 billion minutes of their time, not each, 57 billion minutes of their time to watching the show. So what do you believe? Do you believe their opinion that it's awful? Or do you believe their behaviour that they just can't get enough of it? And time again, we see that opinion and behaviour contradict. Why? Not because our customers or our users are trying to trick us, not because they're trying to fool us or they're stupid. It's just because the brain just doesn't work that way. The brain is a bad predictor of taste or bad predictor of future behaviour. It's very good at behaving today the way it will behave tomorrow, but it's poor at knowing what it will value tomorrow. I think David Ogilvy puts it best. Consumers don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. Not because they're evil, just because they're human. So behaviour trumps opinion for breakfast. There's a couple of interesting little cultural things that I see mature digital product organisations do. They're not magic bullets, but I find them instructive in terms of how we start to overcome some of those biases. I thought I'd get a meme in just to assure the young people that I'm still down with the kids, So in Google, they avoid the word design. The word they use instead is design hypothesis. It is a design hypothesis until you have seen a user behave with it. Once you've seen a user behave with it, and the user is happy with it, they can use it, they understand it, then you can call it a design. Until you've observed behaviour, it is only a design hypothesis. Amazon, when it comes to testing, they don't allow you to use the word validation. The word that they prefer to use is the word testing. Why? Because validation suggests that you are bringing your stooge users in to confirm that you are indeed a design genius, whereas what you want to do is you want to bring your users in to break it. You want to bring them in to challenge it. So they don't come in to validate, they come in to test. I saw a thing online last week which I really liked. Design like you're right, but test like you're wrong. I thought that summed it up for me. So that's number 3. Behaviour trumps opinion every day of the week. Every design decision you make is nothing more than a working hypothesis. And the final thing that I'll say, if you'll indulge me, my final sort of chairmanly comment, it's not mine. I've heard a number of designers say it. Most recently, the one I heard say it was Johnny Ive. I'm sure loads have said it. I don't know who said it first, but it really resonated with me. Design is not the veneer. Design is the essence. And if you work in design and you confine yourself only to the interface, or you think your job is only to make pixels look nice. Look, attractive interfaces are brilliant, and I really don't mean to in any way disparage it. They are an important part of an ecosystem. But if we confine ourselves to say, this is how we define design, or this is what we understand it to be, we completely miss the point of building products, the likes of which Johnny Yee was at the helm of back in the day. What does this mean in practical terms? I think in practical terms, and I think this kind of connects to one of the questions from earlier about the relationship between developers and designers. It means this. Design is everybody's job, regardless of your job title. Why? Because design is just too difficult to leave to the design department. There's just too much to it to say, oh, those guys over there in that office with those screens, well, they look after design. Everybody else does other stuff. I'll leave you with this story just to kind of wrap up. In the mid-1960s, two very dominant Japanese brands, Sony and Toyota, were dominating the Japanese market for electronic and automobile goods, unsurprisingly. And both independently, but at the same time, decided that they wanted to start to export. And both organisations identified the west coast of America as the most readily addressable export market. So Sony started selling electronic goods, Toyota started selling cars. Both organisations had a terrible time, lost a fortune in those early years. Why? Because American competitors were selling their products cheaper, the products that they were selling were better value, the products they were selling were more reliable. So Sony and Toyota quickly realised that what they had was a product problem. So if they're going to compete, they need to improve their products, which were perfectly good for their domestic market, but not good enough to compete internationally. So here's what I find interesting, or hopefully instructive, about their response. They didn't say, we've got to do design better. They said, we've got to do design different. In other words, we've got to see design as a different thing. It's not the thing now that the design department does. Design is everybody's job. Toyota took the view that every time a customer has a conversation with a salesperson on a garage forecourt, and that customer has an idea or a thought or a piece of feedback on what they make of that product, every time that conversation dies on that garage forecourt, the opportunity to improve the product is gone. Every time someone working on the production line observes how the engine fits into the engine casing, or how two joints come together, or how the suspension works, every time someone on the production line identifies something which could be better, every time they are silenced, Toyota lose the opportunity to improve that product. So the big initiative that Toyota launched was this idea that design is everybody's job. They started to set up this process whereby they welcomed product feedback. They welcomed, in particular, insight from customers about what they liked and didn't like on the products. They wanted to make sure that everyone in the organisation felt empowered, that every time they learned something that could improve the product or could improve the car, there was something they could do with it. They could send it somewhere. Now, that doesn't mean, to go back to the idea about behaviour versus opinion, that doesn't mean that every idea was put in the new car, but it went into a process whereby it was considered or prototyped or tested and so on. And even up to the current day, in certain circumstances, people working on Toyota production lines are empowered in the right circumstances to go to the wall and press a big button that stops the production line. Now, I've never been involved in something like that production, but I can only imagine that the cost of stopping a production line is astronomical. But Toyota take the view that just every now and again, there's something about the product or the product design or product improvement that is so important that the production line gets stopped, and whoever has observed the thing has a conversation with someone else so that that gets passed up the chain. And for me, that's at the heart of how I think we as designers need to see ourselves and our role and our collaboration and our relationships with colleagues in engineering, colleagues in product design, and so on. Design isn't just the veneer. We do it a huge disservice if we allow it to be perceived that way. Design is the essence of the product, and therefore design is everybody's job. So let me just conclude. Summarised in a slide I hope you'll take a photo of. So I'll try and look smart in front of the slide, and I'll let you folks take the photo. So number one, design is the science of deliberate decision making. There are loads of things that sidetrack us from making good decisions. Design is saying we're going to acknowledge them, and we're going to battle through them to make the best decisions we can. Embracing wrongness is a superpower. We're very possibly wrong about most of the things we believe. Let's kind of it's very freeing to acknowledge that. Let's acknowledge it and try and fix it. Behaviour eats opinion for breakfast, and design is not the veneer. Design is the essence. So if you're wondering what the old guy has been up to over the last 30 years and what he now thinks, having reflected on it all, those four things are the conclusion of my efforts. Thank you very much. Martin.
Gareth, thank you very much. My name is Martin Gilchrist. I'm the practice manager at Gilchrist & Co. Chartered Accountants. And I've also been on the trip for the last 30 years. We've been doing what we've done for 30 years. A bit like you, the reason we've been very successful at Gilchrist & Co. over that period of time is we've been constantly designing our processes, and our policies, and our practices, and the way that we do things to make sure that we get a better practice. I suppose the question I have for you, Gareth, is looking back over those 30 years, and you said right at the start of your talk, you were there at the beginning of something. You were there at the beginning of something to do with computers, the internet, and all that type of stuff. Do you feel that being there at that time and having that opportunity that created